We continue to follow breaking news and extend our K-Count news at noon. Former President Donald Trump is being arraigned inside a federal courthouse at the top of the hour. 3 police officers who defended the Capitol on January 6 were seen entering that courthouse just a short time ago. Now, Mr. Trump's attorney and spokesperson, Elena Haba, addressed the media just a short time ago.
This is election interference at its finest against the leading candidate right now for president, for either party. President Trump is under siege in a way that we have never seen before. President Trump and his legal team and everyone on his team will continue to fight, not for him, but for the American people.
And joining us once again is attorney at law Rachel Fiset.
Hi, Rachel. Thanks for coming back. You know, let's talk about the indictment. It includes 2 crimes that were actually recommended by the January 6th committee during their investigation: the conspiracy to defraud the U.S. government and an official proceeding, but it didn't follow their recommendation to pursue rarely used Insurrection Act charges, bringing the other charges instead. What are your thoughts about that?
I think that Jack Smith took this right down the middle as to the charges that he felt most comfortable he could prove in court. And I think the insurrection charges are a little more difficult to prove against Donald Trump because he wasn't actively inside of the White House in the way that the other rioters were. Even though he might have incited it, I think that charge gets closer to the free speech defense than the other charges do. The other charges are based on evidence as it relates to obstructing official proceedings, specifically the vote and the vote count.
And earlier when we were talking to you, we talked about just free speech, but the former president has also said that he was just following his attorney's suggestions and what they were telling him to do.
And that's why the indictment is chock full of statements that relate to him being told, including by Department of Justice officials, which are arguably his attorneys as the president, of them telling him that his thoughts, that his comments are false, that this didn't happen. We don't have evidence that this happened. And that is why the indictment is so long, because what they are doing is basically breaking down that type of defense inside of it.
You know, using a defense, saying that your attorneys were giving you this recommendation and you followed it, that's a really difficult defense, isn't it? Because one, you're going to have to involve your attorneys, you're going to have to waive attorney-client privilege, you're most likely are going to have to testify yourself to establish that, opening yourself up to cross-examination. So that's really a hard way to go, isn't it?
In my line of work, it comes up fairly often, and it's called the advice of counsel defense, and that is my attorneys said I could do it. I ran it through legal, we were good, and so I just did what I was told, and that is a real defense. However, in this case, that's right, he has to waive all privileged communications, he would have to testify to say what he was doing, and then his attorneys would have to testify. And his attorneys, as you may recall here, are likely the co-conspirators listed in the indictment.
I mean, we're talking about 6 of them.
Yes, yes. And, you know, this was all supposed to be starting at the top of the hour. It is now 1:01. Cameras are not allowed in the courthouse. But can you give us an idea of what is actually happening, in your opinion, right now? What would be going on?
What would be going on right now is if he has been booked, if the marshals are done with him, they are walking him down to the courthouse. There is heavy security. Everything is moving very slowly, just based on all of the precautions for his safety and for the safety of anyone around the courthouse. So they are walking him down. He will be sat inside of the courthouse. He will be at counsel table as a defendant, and the judge will come in as the judge does every day. It's a magistrate judge, so it's not the the main district court judge, and this judge does this all day long. And the judge comes in, they address the courtroom, they talk to him like any other defendant.
So it's Judge Upadhyaya, who's the magistrate judge. She is not the trial judge that is going to be hearing this case, but still, she has some leeway what she can do here. She can make requirements, right, in lieu of bond, which we don't expect. We don't expect travel restrictions, that sort of thing. Do you anticipate there'll be any sort of restrictions put on him?
I don't think he'll have travel restrictions. I don't think he'll have to go and report to pretrial services, which is something that a lot of defendants have to do. They have to go, they have to check in every couple of weeks. I don't think he'll have any of those restrictions. The question remains as to whether he is allowed to be in the press, because that is the issue here over and over again, is the media. But I don't know that they're going to restrict him in that way on this case, because it's a little different than the classified documents cases where they're worried about classified information coming out. So that'll be interesting as to what the judge does in this case.
And there is already talk that the former president wants this case moved out of D.C., saying that he could not get a fair trial there. What are your thoughts? I mean, he's saying West Virginia. What are you thinking?
Well, D.C. is not the best district for him. Politically speaking, he's more likely to get a jury of Democrats than Republicans. However, the way the law works is jurisdiction happens where the crime occurs. And here the crime occurred in D.C., and I don't like my jury pool is not really an argument for a change of venue.
I mean, it's really venue shopping, isn't it? We know in the District of Columbia, the former president got 5.4% of the vote. In West Virginia, the president in the 2020 election got nearly 70% of the vote. So it's pretty clear what's happening there. So you don't believe that's going to happen. We're about to go live to the scene out front there. So I want to ask you really briefly before we do, what kind of impact do you think that ever has, if ever, on a judge when they hear the roar of a crowd outside or they know there's media scrutiny? Do you think that influences how they handle it at all?
I think it is impossible for a judge to completely ignore that fact, but I think there will be very careful rulings in this case, which is why I would go back to whether or not him speaking to the media would be a condition. That condition may not want to be scrutinized at this point, so the judge may elect not to make it a condition. But I just think human nature is that judges are aware when they are really being watched.
All right, stand by for one moment, because we are going to go live there to the scene. And we're joined now by Natalie Brand, who is outside the courthouse. And Natalie, we know that in the district, or probably weren't anticipating as many protesters as there were out in Miami, for example. What are you seeing at this moment?
Well, I can tell you it's just a sea of security here, Ross and Amy. Around each corner, all around the courthouse here, there are just rows of police cars and officers posted up, watching over the crowds to make sure things stay calm. As you can imagine, it's kind of a tense feeling here. I mean, I can look over my left shoulder and see the U.S. Capitol, where the January 6th Capitol attack occurred. Of course, the former president now facing charges related to that day and alleged efforts to overturn the 2020 election. And the Capitol attack from 2021 still weighs very heavily on the minds of not only the officers who work in the District of Columbia, but also the people who were here that day. Just yesterday, there was a scare, a bogus call of an active shooter over at the Capitol. That put everyone on heightened alert even ahead of this hearing. Now, that turned out, again, to be bogus, but the police presence preparing for any potential threat, as you might imagine, is just incredibly intense. And on top of all the police, you have groups, small crowds, I have to say, small crowds that I've seen so far, of demonstrators against the former president, and also some supporters who have traveled here, even those from out of state who said that they wanted to show up for this hearing and signal that they have the former president's back and that they will also support him in 2024. So a very interesting scene as we have a former president of the United States who's also running for the presidency once again, arriving here for this historic, unprecedented hearing in a city that is still a bit scarred from what happened here on January 6, 2021.
And Natalie, we can certainly hear the loud roar of people there around you. I know that in Miami, there were a few skirmishes between those that were there to support the former president and those that clearly were not. Have you been seeing anything like that today? Any skirmishes between both sides?
So far, things have remained pretty calm and civil. There have been some interactions, but police have also been observing everything and ready to kind of jump in and move crowds to the side if things start to escalate. So I have to say that the local police here in Washington, D.C. are kind of experts and skilled at trying to diffuse situations before they happen. This is a mix of local law enforcement, federal law enforcement, Secret Service, U.S. Marshals. Everyone who is part of this today has kind of been trained and prepared to handle anything that could potentially happen. And I also want to mention that there's some interesting tactics that the police are prepared to employ as well. There's a line of snow plows that have been set up to help create a barricade, and we've also seen them in protest and protest situations where they can kind of be used for crowd control as well. So it seems like officers are keeping a close eye on things, and so far things have remained calm. We hope it remains that way. Some people with holding various signs, either in support or protest of the former president, say that they just kind of wanted to be here to witness this moment in history.
All right, Natalie Brand, live for us in Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for joining us. And, you know, as Natalie was saying, this is incredibly personal to many of those officers. We know that 4 of the Capitol Police officers committed suicide, unfortunately, in the wake of these events, and so many people were injured. 138 officers were injured as those 2,000 people stormed the Capitol back on January 6th. So I know we talked about this right before we went to Natalie, how the court could be influenced by public opinion, but you know as well as anyone does, inside a federal courthouse, the judges intermingle all the time with U.S. Marshals and police officers and prosecutors. This is very personal, something that happened right across the street on the Capitol grounds back in 2021. How do you think that emotion may influence the court? Because certainly it's going to have an effect when the very people they work with, U.S. Marshals, officers, have been perceived as being injured by all of this.
The federal judges absolutely intermingle, and the marshals and the clerks and the people inside of their courthouses. I have clerked for a federal judge. They are the judge's family. That is who they see every day, and their lifetime appointments. These are long-term relationships, and it is hard for them to have seen what happened. The other part of being a federal judge, though, is that people are going to act impartially where they need to act impartially. But the impact of the insurrection, which is, again, not the charge here, was very real inside of Washington, D.C. and inside of the courthouse.
And Rachel, let's talk a little bit about the 6 co-conspirators and how this is all going to play out with the former president. In your opinion, how this is going to impact the case against him?
The 6 co-conspirators are attorneys, and I think it is incredibly interesting that they did elect not to indict them yet, which could suggest, as we discussed earlier, that they want a one-defendant case. They can go forward with that case, and they are losing really no ground in that they can't indict them later, because he can always indict them, so long as they're within the statute of the crimes for which they are indicted. The other suggestion would be that he's waiting for them to flip.
And that's my theory, actually, because we're talking about Rudy Giuliani, who is most likely co-conspirator #1 that's been widely reported, or John Eastman, his constitutional law expert. So that's a very real possibility right now. So you indict the main person you're going after, the main target, and now the threat of an indictment, right, against current and former attorneys may be leading them to do a plea bargain.
That is often a strategy that is used, and I think that it may be used here. But the other thing that could happen is they're not really going to show up on his defense, because none of them are going to take the stand, because they all are under threat of indictment themselves. So they don't really lose anything in not having them part of this indictment yet.
But again, we've been talking about the fact that he says that he was following his attorney's orders. So if those attorneys are the 6 co-conspirators, it's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out.
It's going to be fascinating how it all plays out. Will Donald Trump take the stand to say that? And will the attorneys then come take the stand and say, yes, that was my advice? I mean, there's a lot there, and I think at the end of the day, that defense actually won't hold up.
I just want to remind everyone, if you're just joining us right now, you're looking at live pictures of the federal courthouse in Washington, D.C. You can see some of the protesters outside. The president is now inside a courtroom with special counsel Jack Smith being read those 4 felony charges. We expect him to enter a plea of not guilty, and then the conditions of his release will be announced, and then he will come outside. That should happen in just a few minutes, because this is a very, very quick proceeding. I want to ask you about special counsel Jack Smith. Do you think this was really a stroke of genius that he just indicted President Trump first to get this slim and quickly through the court system?
I think that Jack Smith is a career prosecutor that would know all the angles of getting to trial quickly in such a high-profile case. So I don't think that it wasn't thought about. And I believe that this could be where all of their evidence lies, and frankly, where they believe it would be the most important indictment, even if you lose people along the way. So I'm not going to put a stroke of genius off the table. It seems possible.
And of course, there are no cameras in the federal courthouse, but what we are hearing is that the judge has not arrived and that the former president is in the courtroom. And what we are hearing is that he's a little fidgety. And, you know, we were talking to you earlier about any special treatment that he might receive being the former president, but we're seeing now that, you know, he's still waiting.
Yeah, well, usually the judge comes when the judge wants to come. And
that is so true, right?
And it doesn't matter who
it doesn't matter.
Maybe it's more of a sign, actually, of who's really running the show here. And, you know, I have to tell you, after covering the White House with President Trump for 4 years, he does not like, for all of his outspokenness that some Democrats might call bluster, he does not like to be confronted directly or be in a position where someone is more powerful or in control. So certainly this is some tense moments for the president to be in a court with largely a security group there, but some people from the public, some representatives on the media getting access inside the courtroom, because, you know, it is relatively small inside there. Let's talk about what this courthouse has been through. We've had about 2,000 people that stormed the Capitol. More than 1,000 of them have been investigated or charged.
Right.
700 of them have already been inside some sort of court hearing, and more than 500 of them have either been convicted or pleaded guilty. So does that seem like a pretty high success rate at this time for prosecuting the people who were directly involved? And what does that mean for the president now, the person who is allegedly at the top of this whole scheme to be indicted?
There is high familiarity with what happened inside of that courthouse. They are very versed inside the courthouse, inside of D.C., particularly inside of the district court judge's courtroom where Donald Trump would stand trial, as she's done so many of the cases herself. Yes, high familiarity in a way that promotes the idea that this case could go to trial quicker. They don't have to get up to speed as much on the facts, what's going on. And frankly, a lot of cases when there's giant crimes like that where they're related, that's normal. That's normal to have judges that are familiar with the crimes in front of them. And it speaks to just more of an awareness and an ability to try the case.
And we keep talking about the fact that it is the former president and any special treatment that he may receive. We do know that he will not have his mugshot taken. But what about things like travel restrictions after being charged? I mean, this is a man who has a private plane that he can go anywhere he wants. He has multiple residences. Will they limit what he can do after this, in your opinion?
I don't think today he will be limited because he is on the campaign trail. So the limiting factors that defendants face most of the time is because they're afraid they're a flight risk. And I don't think Donald Trump, as he runs for president, is a flight risk. And he is so communicative with the public, it's fairly easy to trace where he is. Now, should that change, the conditions of bail, of going forward, would also change. But I think at this point, they might give him the flexibility, again, not to get the scrutiny from the public that maybe somebody else would get if they were the defendant, but not to get that scrutiny, so they might just give him more freedom as a little bit of special treatment.
You know, it's interesting because he is very, very communicative. We know that of the president. He did say on Truth Social before going into this hearing, quote, "It is a great honor because I am being arrested for you. Make America great again." So isn't this interesting that the president is sort of casting this idea out there that he's not being brought up on charges, that it's really his MAGA supporters that are being threatened by this, that there's something at root wrong with the justice system, or there's some sort of conspiracy. This is a narrative that we've heard from the president over and over and over again. What do you think about that statement, him trying to deflect that to the public? And do you think that in any way is damaging to the court case? Because after all, anyone is a potential juror at this point, and the president now has the opportunity to influence the entire country and possibly people who will be judging his fate.
I think that is one way to put it. I think he is fundraising with that because he has to raise funds to pay his attorneys. And those funds are what I'm hearing, most of what the super PAC money is going to.
Nearly $60 million has been reported now. $60 million, almost all the money that he has raised has gone for his legal fees. I'm not sure that all of his supporters knew precisely that's where the money would go.
Well, but in saying it's not me that's being prosecuted, it's you, it makes people want to dig a little bit deeper into their pockets to help him get out of this. And remember, we're playing a bit of a game here. I think former President Trump is playing a game, hoping he'll get elected and that he can then pardon himself. So it's a timeline game.
And we are hearing that the judge has entered the courtroom, and that in Miami, when the case was going on, the judge was referring to him as the former Mr. President. This time we're hearing that the judge is addressing him as just Mr. Trump. So a little change here in how the dynamics are working in the courtroom.
That is very interesting, I find. What do you think about that? That's very unusual, actually, because he is the former president. That is his official title.
And in this courtroom, the message is being sent, you are a defendant like everyone else. Got a docket, I'm coming late when I want to come late. There's somebody before you, there's somebody after you.
Take a number.
We're going to move this along.
Yeah, the tone's definitely being set right now, just by, he had to wait for the judge, now being addressed as Mr. Trump. Like you said, he is just like any other defendant in this courtroom today.
Rachel, you have represented high-profile politicians in the past. You represented former Sheriff Lee Baca, correct?
I did.
His plea bargain?
Yes.
On his plea bargain agreement. What would you be advising the former president on how to handle this? Because it seems that he has a very long history of not listening to his attorneys, except now that he's claiming that he was listening, right, in this. But it does seem like he has a very long history of not following the advice. What would you be telling him about how to handle this walking out of the courtroom today?
Minimal words, minimal public communication, particularly of his brand, is so unhelpful to the prosecution end of his case. That would be the general advice, because generally you are looking at the opposing counsel, the prosecutor, and that is the person you are not trying to give more evidence to of your guilt. And that would be my general advice. Donald Trump, however, thinks if he's going to win, it's not going to be in court. It's going to be in public, and there's going to be some way to get out of it based on his supporters. So his messaging and the way he's thinking about his case and how he's going to defend his case is straight built for the public, because the end game is to get elected and get out of it.
We're receiving information right now that Trump has been sworn in.
And we are also hearing that our colleague Scott McFarlane, who is a journalist with CBS, has been live tweeting what is happening in the courtroom. I believe that we are going to put up one of those tweets. He is explaining what's happening in the courtroom, is what I was told.
Yes, I understand that the president has been sworn in, and he's now answering questions from the judge. And as Scott McFarlane is reporting here, that he is being addressed as Mr. Trump.
And that, let's see here, that he has told the judge that his name is Donald J. Trump. John is the J, and she asked his age. And Mr. Trump says 77.
Well, so these are pretty standard questions at this point. This is proceeding normally, but I think it's very clear that this judge is not acting any differently than she would. We've been in many courtrooms. And, you know, inside the courtroom, the judge has unilateral discretion to do anything. She can throw him in jail if she wants, or she can deny him bond if she wants.
That's right.
So it looks like it is proceeding as normally for everyone that comes in front of her. What do you think?
I agree with you. I mean, I think she maybe was taking a deep breath in her chambers before she went out and had to proceed normally, as she always does, as this is a monumental day and a monumental case, no matter how you slice it. But she is taking the bench, and she is going forward with an arraignment, and I think this will be fairly uneventful.
Now, there was talk initially that Mr. Trump did not have to appear physically in court, that he could have actually appeared via Zoom. What does it say to you that he made sure to be there today in court?
It's his right to be there in court, and most defendants do appear in court. And I think he is trying to also rally his base in a little bit and saying I had to show up for court, and, you know, I was going to getting arrested and all of those things. But he has been afforded some luxuries so they wouldn't have to have the amount of security they had, and he elected to go forward with attending his day in court.
Well, it's pretty clear that he wants to send a message during all of this. Have you had a chance to read through the indictment?
I have.
And what do you think, because right now at this moment those charges are being read to him, what do you think of the strength of the indictment as a legal professional, as an attorney yourself?
I think the indictment is well written. I think it sets forth the crimes for which he is charged. I think they were careful to get evidence. I think they have more than they have put in the indictment.
Certainly.
But I think that the indictment, as far as a defraud indictment, a conspiracy indictment as it relates to obstruction of an official proceeding, they have laid those out very carefully. It's understandable to the public. It's understandable as it relates to the knowledge and intent element, which is the most difficult element to show. And I think that it's